Our next speaker is the head of the Scientific Research Group, the National Research and Clinical Center for Neurology and Neurosurgery in Minsk, Belarus. He's the author of Oswald, Russian Episode, in which he accounts his experience as Lee Oswald's closest and only English-speaking friend during Oswald's time in Russia. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Ernst Titovets.
Oh, thank you. Well, in the first place, I'd like to thank Jim. It's flexible. Thank you. Jim Lissar, Andrew Craig, and Jerry Parlikop for making possible for me coming over here. Well, I like the still living witness under this name we are just figuring in here, implication being made haste to watch, they might kick the bucket any time. Well, in my talk, I just divided it in two sections. First, rather boring socio-political views, but it's a short one, of Lee Harvey Oswald. I believe that's the way to understand his ambition, what makes him tick, and then I'll talk about him as a person, as a man I knew. And, well, let's revisit the 60s, the time he was in Minsk. To introduce a timeline, he appeared in Moscow in 1960, a little bit before 19 years. He was born in October 18, 1939, and he turned up in Moscow just before the date, so he was still 19, and then he turned 20, just, a kid. Ambitious, infatuated with Marx, and that part of that teaching, very complicated teaching, when he spoke about affluent society, of equals, all those things. And actually, I doubt, and we had many debates with him on sociology, I doubt if he had academic background on that. Well, so he appeared in 1960. In Minsk, he already lived since January 6, 1960, and left in 1962 already with family, wife and daughter. Well, I met him first in autumn 1960, and our knowing each other lasted till his very last days, actually. My last letter to him was dated October 1963. Well, that's the timeline. The first place here, okay. Now, I'm in command of this. Well, that's what he came back to the United States with, with quite an impressive works in thesis form. The names, The Collective, Life of Russian Worker, Speech, speech on the far right, on communism and capitalism, the Communist Party of the United States, the Athenian System. Then he appeared on TV already in New Orleans, on Latin listening, American Focus. Well, all those things I gave here. He delivered a lecture at Jesus College, Contemporary Politics and Practice of Communism. And in all those appearances, he demonstrated that he was a competent agitator. He used, if you listen to what recordings he of his appearance in Latin Listening Post, He was quite a inborn orator with all those rhetoric approaches like repetition, contrast, all those things. So it was inborn in him. And he came with a theory, the crisis theory, the theory of crisis. And in this theory, he's very much revealing all he thinks about now I found it, okay. Well, he stresses what I'd like to, well, just read that. What I just want to stress here, we have no interest in violently opposing the US government. He was a very peaceful person, and preparation in a special party, well, he believes in crisis. At that time, crisis was very possible. One possibility was atomic war or some other crisis, and he believed that people wouldn't want to go on living under the old system. They would just turn to something better. It was a very naive theory, but he was just logical in his own way. Then, well, so I like this non-violence. It's very important here. Then emplacement of a separate, democratic, pure communist society is our goal. Well, this communist society is just appalling and menacing, especially at that time, to American audience, especially in the time of peak of Cold War, with Russia in possession of nuclear weapons, a situation when World War III would result in humanity being annihilated from the globe. And he meant actually that affluent society that he was fancied in his head. And again, a truly democratic system should combine the better qualities of the two socialist, on American foundation, opposed to both to both world system, capitalism and socialism, as they are now. That is our ideal. You see, it's quite a program. He came to Russia fascinated with socialism, got disappointed, and still he took a rational approach and developed a new theory, he called it the Athenian System, when he combined the best of two systems based on American soil. I rather take him serious. Why his, has special meaning to me? We had debates with him, sort of spontaneous. I wasn't interested in politics at all. It was absolutely boring, especially in the atmosphere of indoctrination at that time. We indoctrinated at the university, school. Well, that's, total indoctrination. But I sense interest in him, and when we were only two of us at his place, somehow we started comparing all systems, starting with slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism. When it came to socialism, he put on to me, I was very insistent that socialism was the best in all. You there in the United States, you lynch niggers, it's Ku Klux Klan. There's unemployment, and that sort of things. Well, he objected, and here in our country we have no unemployment, we have high education, free, we have this and that. And he said, you don't know exactly how it works. You're being influenced by your upbringing. And when I went on being insistent on that, he flared up and said, you live here like slaves, you can't travel. Well, there was something that rang true in what he said. And at that time, and again, Lee, he would flare up, but then he would just come back, calm down. And he was conciliatory. He said, you can't sacrifice one system for another. So although he was really disappointed with socialist system because it betrayed him best what he thought about this country, he still viewed it rationally, and decided by the way, he was very patriotic, and here it shows when he decided to adopt a better system for America that he belonged to. So this Syrian crisis, and if you consider Oswald from this point of view, it explains why he came to Russia in the first place, why he came back. He said, standard of living in the United States better, and I win family and daughter and everything. And he went on organizing. Well, I view this, you see this party clause here, and I view this Fair Play for Fugue Committee as his feeble attempt to make himself visible, which he did actually, and he might have transferred this, turned it into his special party. Although there was no membership in there, but it's only in the beginning. And along the line of his thinking, it was very rational. And again, he mixed with all kinds of people. It's not surprising because he expected to find support of his theory, his unifying theory, in all layers of society, within all believers. And we find this, actually researching his life. Well, next. Now, by the way, what he writes about life of Soviet worker, he learned by hard way. Here, two pictures, Oswald in group of fellow workers. They're taken one by one. The searching here, they're having fun with those dark glasses. That was a little bit outlandish at that time, and they're impersonating foreigners to the best of their abilities. They're just hilarious. You see this laughter and everything here, but snatched out of context. You saw that, possibly have this CD. Look, here is inserted this part of Oswald posing as sort of sort of criminal with dark glasses and everything. Well, adding sickle and hammer, mauve color, KGB badge, and here you have the doctored image of Oswald. Unfortunately, that's the only way. It's the only way how things were taken out of context and turned into what we have now. Well, that's the final. He was arrested and everything. You know that. Now, I'm just. You see here, have smiling Oswald. That's the man I knew. I just, this found a picture. They are on the web. Oswald the kid and Marines and Oswald in Minsk. That's real Oswald, He was full of humor and clever guy, and that's how I, perceive this character. Well, here just to introduce what surrounding what city he lived. He lived actually here, a very beautiful place. This Switzerland River, it's not navigable, although in some literature you would find that Oswald stood on the balcony of his flat here, watching the ships passing by. Actually, you can wade it here. well, just park area. This is the headquarters of the Belarusian military region, conveniently placed within sight of Lee Oswald. If you wanted to watch the activity around there, an activity for a spy is very important. Know the cars are arriving. He would observe the signature, the numbers of car, the activity. That's very important information for a spy. So rather, just sort of thing that a spy would be interested in. Actually, this picture is taken from opera house. Oswald was fond in opera. Actually, immediately after we were introduced to each other, the very night, later he saw me away to a bus stop, and he suggested going to opera house. And actually he got a good pitch and would just sing certain tunes when I asked him to. Well, and again, here, there's an Institute of Foreign Languages over here, dormitory, where most of the girls who went in for English lived. His work, well, these radio factories were around here. So a very carefully thought environment for him. He could be observed by the KGB. Actually, he had no point of leaving this area on the whole. Well, I lived very far from there. Incidentally, all the others, Pavel Golovachov, I'll just go next slide. Oh, no, it's me. Lived very close by. Marina, whom he married within 5 minutes reach, worked 10 minutes reach. All this, me, what I'm giving here, his friend, oh no, I just come back. Is anything interesting here? Yes, that's interesting. That's what he gave in his historic diary about me. It's a very, he doesn't write much about anybody here, but I'm given sort of prominence here by 3 or 4 references to me. Among here, well, a medical student, that's correct. Speaks English very well, all right. 4th-year student. We go to to dormitory, all right. Here, it's an important occasion for him. We go to a trade union dance when he met Marina, his future wife, and was there. Here, when he is alone, I and Ernst, it's Erich, Russian don't discriminate between Ernst and Erich, to go to the dances at public places. Here is an interesting one. When I told Erich, my oldest existing acquaintance, and that I'm going to the States. He's okay, but I'm afraid he's too good a young Communist League member. I'll wait till the last minute. It's a very interesting admission. In the first place, I knew from the very beginning that they were going to the States first. And this is, knowing Lee, this is the way of protection. He extended his protection to me, because if I had no idea that he was going abroad, as a young Communist League member, I certainly couldn't influence him to stay here. And he's not, if you remember his letter to Robert, there's the same motif there. He says, I don't cite it exactly, but the essence is, you don't know me, he writes about my conviction and everything, about my going to Russia. And he writes, because I wanted to protect you. You see, the same scheme here. He protects me, he protects his brother on, say, ideological grounds. Very kind of him. Well, here, just to get in the picture, my activities that time, music, Here I'm reading the Daily Worker. Here I'm working at the Students' Research Center, going for sport. Well, I'm just posing as in my belief, an American would sit, reading newspaper. It's grotesque. Well, I never saw Americans there, but still, my friend was taking this picture. Now, well, we lived in time of Cold War. Lee is, well, shooting range, and me shooting, again at shooting range. We were promoted to junior lieutenants on completing medical institute. We got military training because at that time, Cold War, it was a joking affair, and everybody got military education, this and that level. So that's a reminder of the Cold War. And what do we have here? His friends. Well, that's his first love. It's very important psychologically for Lee. He met her at the factory, fall in love, and he said no when he suggested to marry him, although he believed it would be yes. And when he met Marina later on, he still was in love with Ella German. And he writes so in his diary. He was only gradually forgetting her. Well, Marina was just a pretty face. That's an interpreter, well, a KGB, I'm sure. That's together in his room. In some literature, you'll find that he lived in a lavishly furnished room. Well, that's how lavish it was. Just a deal table, well, you see. And here, again, his lavishly furnished room, bookshelf, Ella, Rosa, and Pavel Golovachov. He mentioned him in his diary as the son of a twice hero of Soviet Union. That was important to him, mark that. And he was a KGB informer, self-confessed KGB informer. Here, the Zegas family, the Spanish-speaking Zegas family, Alexander, the head of the family, worked at the radio plant. He spoke, sort of broken English with American accent. And I was introduced to Lee at their family. It's the Signora, his wife, Anita, and this is Leonora, with beautiful soprano, mezzo-soprano. She worked at Philharmonic Society. And here Lee, camping at campfire, he led quite and enjoy his life there. He was fond of fishing, and here is with a fishing rod standing there. Now, among his acquaintances, many of you might recognize Chairman Khrushchev, and next to him sits Professor Cherkasova. She taught at Belarusian State University and conducted experiments, classified experiments at nuclear reactor. Well, influence in low doses of radiation, continuous radiation on organisms, very important experiments. Somehow they met. So, her son, and she told him about what kind of research she went into. Although in her position, she had she shouldn't have mixed with foreigners. A person conducting classified research had no right. They signed certain papers to the effect that they are aware they must not get in touch with foreigners. She did. So it was another attempt KGB to find Lee's interest, if he would be interested in that secret information. Then Well, here's Happy Lee. That's that's Marina. Pretty face, Happy Lee. Daughter June. That's about they living in Moscow, about to leave back to the States after all official red tape was completed and got the papers and everything. Here, you know, there's a question arises. Some people say that he didn't speak Russian while speaking in Minsk, because he was suspicious that KGB would suspect him of being a spy. I see no logic in that, but that's exactly what you find in literature. And here he writes about in Russian about the names of his still unborn child. So it would be June if it is a girl. Actually, it was a girl. And David Lee, if something, other name, if that would be a boy. By the way, he was very fond of children. You know, there's some kind of people who accept children at very early age. At that time, we were the same age, I couldn't see kids his way. I saw they were just sloppy, well, nuisance. It's only when you grow up, you appreciate those absolutely marvelous creatures, you know, with all their tricks, with all the care you have to take care of them, all those troubles, you appreciate them. So he did speak and write Russian here. And here we have, on leaving Russia, on May, before leaving, I came to see him last. And he, in the first place, he took off his ring, the envy of all workers at the radio plant, and proffered it to me. I said, listen, Lee, it must be an expensive thing. Keep it, you might need that. That was my idea. And those books, The Power of Positive Thinking, and As a Man Thinks, one by Norman Vincent Peale. I know many of you know these books. They set your mind to peace, and he needed that kind of support. Before finally handing them to me, he cut out the inscription of that. So I don't know who inscribed that. It was in small longhand, rather compressed. So these books are still with me. And here, well, here, phonetic symbols, I studied his accent. Actually, I minded him being American. You know, with my English background, British background, I rather look forward to meeting an English, British speaking, that's my deviation. But still, I was Southern American. It was not unerotic, and he spoke pretty close to British standards, you know. And I studied his, thoroughly his English, well, his diphthongs. I discovered that he would say asked instead of asked. I was surprised at first, and later on I found out it was colloquial in New Orleans, so no problem about that. And here, well, you see all that. Then I asked him, he wrote this prayer for me. Now lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. God save me up, etc. I don't know how it came, but he put it down for me. I was happy to get anything from him, all information from him. Here again, Old Man River. You know, it's from the Showboat and sang by Paul Robeson in Russia. He was very much a celebrity in Russia. He spoke Russian, he sang in Russian, the recordings by Melodiev. And here I asked him to give me, I heard the song, I knew the tune, Old Man River. Well, you know that. It's don't say nothing, it just keeps rolling, keeps on rolling along. It's about race segregation, you know the plot. By the way, Paul Robson changed the words there when it says, I'm scared of, tired of living and scared of dying. He changed, I keep on fighting till I am dying. That's Paul Robson version in Russian. Oh, you know, he was quite, you know, about Paul Robson. Well, here is a note. I don't know how I kept it. I found it in between the pages of a book. Dear Erich, I can't make it today. Please come again, etc., etc. Well, that's the enlarged prayer. And I made 2 sessions recording of his American English. First it was at the studio, at not foreign language, medical institute. They have foreign language department there. I was well known there. Actually, I passed my English exam on the very first year. I didn't want to waste my time attending those English lessons, embarrassing teachers, you know. And others had to go 4 more years. They knew me at the department. I would come out there to chat English with them, and they said, okay. And they just, there was a special examination board. They asked me to read, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, absolutely boring first chapter. Later, I learned why they gave me that, because the teachers studied that at the foreign languages. Well, we just had talk about this and that, and they were quite satisfied. I got top grades, and that's the end of it. And, well, there are two tapes, 2 spools. First at the, medical institute, and then at my place. We had only 2 there. And what interesting about, I asked him to read from literature, then I asked him to repeat certain things, then he would just start, ask me to execute military drills, exercise from there. By the way, we had an argument about military drills. You know, it turned out that about face is different in the United States and in Russia, and I was surprised. I thought they were the same in both countries, but it wasn't so. And we had a very heated discussion. By the way, whenever we would come to comparing American and Russian, we would absolutely be divided, polar. He would defend American values, and I would defend Russian values. It concerned girls, it concerned the drills. By the way, with those about-face drills, we carefully went through all the movements, and Oswald, although he didn't give up, he said, okay, your good step, parade good step, I like that. That was Lee all over. He would always find a kind of conciliatory gesture. By the way, when it came to physical violence, he was also find way not to fight. You know, many examples in my book of the Russian episode. By the way, it's on sale here. It's sort of commercial. Well, what I want to demonstrate here, I'll just hope the recording will be all right. It's about, I don't know why we came to that. I interviewed him as a killer, Jack Ma, and he boasts about his, nefarious exploits.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I broadcast here from the courtyard. Well, the man shouting is a famous killer. Well, when he was 1 year, he killed his grandma, and he hanged his mother. And now I give the word to Mr. Jack Ma. Sir, Here you have his voice.
Goddamn,
Well,
give me a fucking machine gun and I'll shoot up everybody in the goddamn place.
Will you tell us about your last killing?
Well, it was a young girl under a bridge. She came in carrying a loaf of bread, and I just cut her throat from ear to ear.
What for?
Well, I wanted the loaf of bread, of course.
And what do you think to be your most famous killing in your life?
Well, the time I killed 8 men on the Bowery sidewalk there, they were just standing there loafing around. I didn't like their faces, so I just shot them all with a machine gun. It was very, very famous. All the newspapers carried the story.
Thank you very much. And whom do you prefer kill?
Well, it's all the same to me. I don't know. They're going to execute me tomorrow anyway. So.
Well, you know, he's a very famous killer. I suppose he will deserve his electric chair.
Yeah. Well, they're coming to get me now. I have to go. So long. Here we are in the death cell. Well, they're strapping him in. They're putting him on the chair now.
The officer is approaching the stand. He's raising his arm. He's taking the
switch.
The switch. Now.
For the last word.
Well, what is your last word?
Well, don't pull the switch.
Well, it's Lee all over. You know, there are two parts of this interview. Before, he read from Hemingway, rather from a book, foreign language publishers, and collecting modern American stories, rather somber ones. It was politically orientated. There would be killing there, assassination, and everything. And possibly that would influence why I came up with this absolutely nonsensical, stupid interview. It could be accepted only in the atmosphere of the two kids, young men, fooling before a microphone. But what I'm driving at, the public TV frontline, they asked me for those recordings, and they just cut the second part of that, and they completed that. We are laughing our heads off. So after all those atrocities, we're laughing our head off. That was kind of Oswald was. Absolutely, inhuman person. Another way of doctoring and setting out in context. By the way, Norman Mailer, I don't know why he placed again this first part in his book. He had no rights, legal rights then. He never approached me to have permission to write that. He again used only the first part of that to fit his idea of Lee Harvey Oswald. So you see, there are very many examples when image of Lee being absolutely misinterpreted to fit a particular order, I would put it this way. Well, on purely personal relation, would just races downstairs. Well, who reaches the ground floor first? He would just, when we were alone, he would start, do all sort of frolic. He would start investigating, closed door for me, just soft footing to that, crouching, looking through a keyhole as if expecting something to discover behind the door. He would open the door and would find a mop and battered dustbin there, all that in sort of theatrical way. He was very prone to those effects and amusing people when there was nobody around. I doubt if anybody knew this side in him. Well, and finally, that's his notebook with my address in here. Here, my last letter to him, I asked him, he wrote a letter to me informing me that they would be coming back to Russia. I was surprised at that, but I was happy. I would be happy to meet him there. And I asked him to, before I asked him to bring 2 books, author, research books for me that I couldn't find in Russia, and his response was, "I will, and possibly I'll hand them to you by hand on coming over." And it turned out to be my last letter to him. By the way, if you go by number of messages, he wrote more messages to me than I did. Well, and I was under the impression that I was sort of important for him. Well, we, apart from political debates, we had a philosophical debate, and I discovered that he wasn't academically prepared to discuss that. He knew nothing about Feuerbach, Hume, well, all those philosophers. But when I came 2 notches down and explained things in a simple way, it was about idealistic, materialistic approach to reality. He immediately got the grasp and was very active. He was a very naturally very clever guy. Well, from the very beginning, he was stamped with being sort of loose sort of screw loose, you know, kind of that sort of person. It came from American side first, and it was a suggestive for the Russians. How about, you know, we have information that he was mentally imbalanced. The Russians were happy to pick it up, and it was an explanation, you know, he's a madman, he was a madman. Well, not responsible for that. By the way, coming to this sanity issue, certainly he was absolutely sane. That's not only my conclusion. I had my course in psychiatry. Very interesting course. By the end of it, I doubted my own sanity, but I wasn't alone. When I had a therapy course, we would find all sorts of disease of those. Well, all medical students would pass all that. And we see, he tried to commit suicide. Actually, it was his stage of suicide. It was real. And this would have been an excuse for Russians to get out of the country. A very rational approach, just to inform the embassy, listen, your countryman is, try to commit suicide. It's a very serious psychiatric case, because next time, his aggression might have been directed outside, and he wouldn't be responsible for that. The Russian side, actually, a psychiatrist interviewed him through an interpreter. In the first place, it is absolutely impossible to get in touch with the patient through an interpreter. So there was no trust between the two. And when also said that he was sorry about that, everybody was happy and satisfied. So instead of doing this absolutely irrational gesture, especially in time of Cold War, you see, we care about your visitors here, please take him away. We can't make out whether he's crazy or not. No, they just let him be here because the KGB needed him there. I'm sure they knew about his Atsugi experience, about U2. You know that U2 affair, they would fly over Soviet Union, unreachable, and collect a lot of information. You're generous. Thank you. And, all that is my group, my book, which is still available here. And here, already after the collapse of the Soviet Union, normal mailer came to researching after his Oswald's tale. This is British researcher, Barry Penrose, were discussing issue of issue. By the way, here, as you can't discern here, it's, exactly. Early in spring, I met Anthony in Moscow, and he inscribed this book for him. It was just out of print. And I only recently realized that I was holding this book. Well, with normal mailer, it was sort of unfortunate. I didn't give him to view because he wanted to, find black paint to represent his Oswald. Well, all that is in my book, so unfortunately we didn't see eye to eye on Oswald, and I just didn't want to figure to give evidence against Oswald in that negative way, because it wasn't true, you know. And here's the book, which is available still, a few copies there, and here with the 5 minutes warning. Thank you. Thank you.
My question is, you were in the company of other comrades, other people who were friendly with Lee Oswald. You had a community of friends, and you all knew each other, and you had recreation, you had conversation. My question is, after the news of the assassination, and after the news that the person being declared to be the one responsible for the murder of the president, could you tell us just for a moment about the conversation that existed between you and the other members of your community who had known Lee Oswald? What was the consensus? Was everyone astonished?
Well, nobody believed.
Nobody believed.
Yeah. And about friends, you see, looking back, I remember only a few occasions when I spoke Russian in his presence. Mostly, certainly we spoke English. And one time he said, well, Russians around, he said, "Oh, don't speak English, it's impolite," you see. So we all spoke Russian. And for their friends, you see, KGB debriefed all people who knew Oswald under different circumstances. And the idea was, forget about Oswald here in the country or else. And, you know, when I started interviewing people already after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I would ask for pictures and everything. They say, "Oh, we burnt them," and I burnt them. I spoke them head to head. Everybody burnt their pictures, and they decided that was the result of debriefing. So, KGB officer without much imagination. It never came to him that somebody would start interviewing people and would discover that it would all go in for this incendiary business. Yes?
Kind of a two-part. Were you convinced that Oswald really was a defector, or maybe had was perhaps there on an intelligence mission? And do you believe that he was an assassin?
No, as I already said and conveyed, never for a moment I believed that he was capable of pulling a trigger at president whom he loved, admired. Then in his crisis theory, he stresses the non-violent way of reaching his aim, goal. It's very important. Sometimes it looks to me that researchers, I don't know on what grounds, they ignore that very telling part of his activity. Can you imagine just a school dropout getting to the country? Now I'm convinced especially to get first-hand experience of the country. He had no other way to learn socialism. He couldn't afford studying going through the higher, college and everything. And that was just the most, the correct way. And imagine this dropout coming with a theory, with those works in thesis way. That's, he deserves all respect as a thinker. I wouldn't slight that information. Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming here for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, did Mr. Oswald ever confide you about his briefings or his meetings with the American consulate, with Richard Snyder or McVicker?
He never discussed his Moscow experience
Encounters,
with nobody. But when he came to the States, he wrote to me that 2 FBI officers came over asking her a lot of stupid questions. Somewhere here there was appeared information that he wasn't approached by intelligence community people. Well, if you consider FBI people sort of community intelligence, he was approached.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
I was fascinated, thank you, that he wrote you not too long before the assassination, apparently, saying that they might come back to Russia or that they were going to come back to Russia. Can you tell us exactly when that was, and did he mention his trip to Mexico or his attempt to go to Cuba in that letter?
Mm-hmm. You know, going by his letters, I give it in full in my book. He was worried that something, my impression was, he was worried that something would happen either to him or his family. And he desperately, they applied for return to the Soviet Union. It's documented in the Warren Commission reports. And he desperately trying way to get out of the United States fast. And in my thinking, trying the Cuban angle was his, by the way, he wrote, consider this application possibly separately from my wife. So he even considered a situation when she would go and he would go separately. I thought he suspected some menace, and he tried to, Cuban angle, he tried to get his visa. Try that way. That's
and his request or his response to your request regarding the 2 books that you wanted, was that October 26th or 28th
no,
of 63?
It's in my book. All chronology is my book.
Right.
I kept all the track of his letters, and they're dated with addresses and everything. Yes.
I was unclear whether or not you knew Rosa Kuznetsova.
Yes, I did.
Could you tell me what her marital status was? Was she single, divorced, or?
Well, Rosa Kuznetsova, she worked at the in-tourist department, and her job was to meet foreigners, see them attend to her immediate concerns about seeing them around, telling about the city. She spoke British accent. I thought much about my English that time, you know. Well, and
was she previously married?
She was?
Was she previously married?
Well, she wasn't married. As far as I know, she was single, just a pretty plumpish girl. Yeah. And when I researched my book, I started looking for her. And surprising thing was, at that time, she was at the intensive care department, 2 stories high, over my laboratory, and she died of meningitis, herpetic meningitis. You see, and I was looking for her, you know, to interview her.
Paul?
I read Norman Mailer's book, Oswald's Tale. I wanted to ask you, when you knew Lee Harvey Oswald in Minsk, did you ever suspect that he was going to become this great historical figure?
He would come?
He would become this very important historical figure.
Well, as a normal person, I never suspected that, and I had never possessed this historic foresight many years, months before. At that time, there was no Kennedy around. He didn't exist, especially behind the Iron Curtain, you know. And I wasn't obsessed while researching my book. I wasn't obsessed with those conspiracy theories.
Sure.
And we had 2 young men who would just, discuss things, learn things. First, I thought he was a very important person. I didn't know how come he turned up in this country. I thought he was a very important person on some exchange business. And I thought him as a very educated, with high education, versed in literature, music, and gradually I cut him down to size. I thought he wasn't any of those things, but still he was a good guy. An important thing that we had a kind of psychological compatibility. I never felt myself, sort of under pressure in his presence. When you're in presence of a neurotic person, you immediately feel sort of tension, and that's first sign.
Yeah. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was an American hero, and I said so in my two-page spread ad in the New York Times on Tuesday,
Thank you.
July 31st,
Thank you.
2007.
Can I
Last
have,
question?
Can I have e-copy of that?
Yeah, let me give
Possibly later, okay?
Yeah. Last question?
Thank you.
And just one word answer. In your opinion, on a scale from 1 to 10, how good was Oswald speaking Russian?
Well, I would just let you judge that. I'll imitate his accent as a Russian would perceive that. It would sound like that. Well, I speak Russian very well. I can read Russian newspapers, understand everything you say. That was sort of accent. I didn't care about Russian accent. I was quite satisfied him speaking English, although I would advise him to work on his pronunciation. But I never did. Thank you.
Let's thank Dr. Titovets.